Good evening, familia. This is Ray Collazo, your host of the Found Translation Talk Show, your home for Latino politics. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with my regular co-host and one of our top nation's top Latino political analysts and media professionals, my homie Enrique Chaurand. Enrique, good day, my friend. How are you,
Yeah,
brother?
great, Rafael. Thank you. I really appreciate the introduction. How you doing today? Doing well?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Always puts a smile on my face. If people can see the picture above me, that is a 5-year-old Rafael Rey Collazo at a Halloween party, being a good jibaro with my hat and my long sleeve guayabera and my machete, and of course, typical Latino fashion. That Halloween party with a 5-year-old was at the neighborhood bar that my grandfather was the manager of. So I love this picture. When people question, they see all this big shot guy on who's in national politics and podcaster and all that. People question where the roots are real, brother. We come from the streets. There's no question about it.
Absolutely. I have several bar stories and going in after my grandfather. You know, my family owns a restaurant, so we have a bar there. And many a night, my grandmother calling, ¿Dónde está tu abuelo? I know he's there. No me contesta. I don't know. Hey,
We all got those stories, brother.
I
We all
wasn't
got
getting in
those
the middle of that
stories.
one.
We all got
Absolutely
those
not.
stories. Later on in the show, we'll give our sort of weekly January 6th committee hearing updates. I mean, the revelations are just more jaw-dropping than ever. Of course, we'll spend some time and acknowledge the terrible tragedy that took place in San Antonio this past week, and sort of what that means not only for those families, but the larger conversation around our broken immigration system, and some shout outs. I'll be shout outing a Latina who made political history in the Midwest earlier this week. But Enrique, we had to begin with really this not only this sort of historical, one of the most historical Supreme Court decisions that's taken place in our lifetimes, but we had to bring to the table a Latina leader that's been on the forefront of reproductive rights justice and is now one of the most prominent leaders in sort of the national political movement to help elect Latino candidates around the country. So we wanted to introduce a great friend to the show, the managing director of the Latino Victory Fund, and again, one of our nation's most foremost Latina leaders on reproductive justice issues, Yvonne Gutierrez. Yvonne, welcome back to Found in Translation.
Ray, thank you so much for having me. We go way back when I was working for Planned Parenthood in Texas, and you were the crazy stuff was happening, and you would give me a holler and be like, "What's up? What are they doing down there?" And so it's great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me and having me.
No problem, Yvonne. We literally couldn't have done the show without you. And there's other Latina leaders, and I think one of the things that a lot of people are learning now is that this issue, unfortunately, now is front and center in our conversations, and there's a lot of people that didn't realize the good work and the sort of the depth of leadership that Latinas have provided in this space for quite some time, and you're one of many that we have to continue to elevate and have these conversations, because we are really in protection mode of women's rights more than ever. Yvonne, Enrique's going to have some questions for you about sort of what this means for our community in Texas and sort of the statewide battle. But I really wanted to start with you on more of a personal level. I mean, we kind of knew it was coming, obviously, with the leaked majority opinion from Alito a few months ago. But we dreaded this moment. But when you finally heard that Roe v. Wade, after 50 years, was overturned, I mean, just your emotions and what this last week has been for you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. Thank you so much, Ray. I felt like I wanted to throw up, to be honest. It just felt like all of the folks who had said, this will never happen. It's law. It's the Supreme Court. Like, the Supreme Court will never overturn this. And I was, part of me was just angry, just thinking about, that this is due to the Trump presidency. And who he was able to instill in the court and the makeup of the court, and also all of the women who are going to suffer and some who will die because of this decision. And it was just, I've spoken to a number of friends and familia and people who have just said, either, kind of fits of rage to wanting to do all of the things, and just deep sadness for what this means for women in our country, especially Latina and Black women. And so it's been rough, but we've got to fight. This is not the end.
Yvonne, you mentioned really quickly what this means for women of color, right? And so that's kind of where I would like to ask my question, right? You spent, I think it was close to 2 decades working on reproductive health rights. And you services so critical women. But what does this mean, again, to women of color, but more specifically for Latinas?
So one thing that, and thank you for referencing my work in reproductive health and rights. I worked in Texas for Planned Parenthood for nearly 15 years, and what was always and that is during the time that the Texas legislature was out with a vengeance on abortion access and all kinds of limits and all kinds of regulations, and going back and forth through the courts. And it was always, always, always poor women, Latina women, who were the most impacted by these laws. Because when you restrict access to somebody who already has less access, it's even more of the pain and even more of the burden. And so as we look at 26 states that in which abortion will be likely, very highly likely, illegal and in some way, shape, or form in the ballot, and going back and forth with their state courts, et cetera, and to various degrees, that it's going to be incredibly painful. And really, here is why. It is all about resources. It is a resource game. If you are wealthy and you can get on a flight and you can go to another city and you can take time off of work, or state, sorry, and you can take time off of work, you can have somebody to take care of your kids. The vast majority of women who have abortions are mothers. Then you will be able to have access to the healthcare that you need. If you do not, then that is limited for you. And it is an overwhelming burden that we are putting on honestly on Latina women. And, and especially we know, and you look at Texas that already has a 6-week ban on the books. You look at Florida that already has a 15-week ban on the books. That just making it more and more difficult. And thinking about how many women don't even know that they're pregnant until after 6 weeks of pregnancy. So when you just have the most incredible barriers, and it's not even just a barrier to abortion access. It's a barrier to healthcare, period. I mean, we talk about Latinas having less access to contraception, having less access to culturally competent healthcare, where they can get the care that they need, including access to contraception. That is clear that we're going to be more impacted when this decision came down.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you brought up, I should say, the fact that just access to healthcare, right? Like you said, the contraception and other things. There's a poll that was out by Future Majority in 3 states with Latino voters. I'm not sure if you saw. We've talked about it on this podcast previously, in Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. And they asked about Roe v. Wade, and overwhelmingly, Latinos were not supportive of overturning Roe v. Wade. I think there's a misconception and a misnomer out there, right? Just because Latinos tend to be Catholic, or more and more, the majority are Catholic. So, given that the church is, well, not all the church, we can have that debate too also, right?
Right, exactly.
What that looks like, right? But, this misconception that Latinos are overwhelmingly in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade. And that is not the case. Could you speak a little bit to that?
That's absolutely right. And look, as a Latina from South Texas, that is the conception that everyone believes. Oh, well, then, you're, anti-abortion, or, it's against the church, it's against the Catholic Church. When you look at polling and you see, and I think that is also because Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people have an understanding of the need, not only for control over your own body, but also, reproductive rights are human rights. Like, for you to say that somebody can't have access, because somebody can't make a decision about being a parent, that somebody can't have access to the care that they need, that business is your business, and that the government is the one who is making that decision for you, or politicians rather, that they understand what's on the line. And that's why you see, time and time again, that Latinos vote for elected officials who support our values, including our value of access to healthcare, and this is one of them. And then to me, it is just, really just this decision just is really a slap in the face to all women, and to, I think especially to women of color, and Latina women who are going to be so badly impacted when there's no popular opinion for this. There is no public will. There's no will from their own communities for this to be the law of the land. And it is something that, I think Latinos will continue to support and vote on.
And we're talking to Yvonne Gutierrez from the Latino Victory Fund, and one of our nation's foremost Latina reproductive rights activists, talking about, the aftermath of this historic overturning of Roe versus Wade by this ultra right wing Supreme Court, which, in the words of former Secretary of State and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, I told you so, here on Found in Translation with my co-host Enrique Chaurand. Yvonne, this, unfortunately, we're now having to have this conversation post the overturning,
right,
but where this has given us, I think, quite honestly, a lot of Latino leaders around the country more courage, and really pushed us to have these conversations, which again, we should have been having more in our community, bluntly, around the difference between and this is where the conversations and the debates got muddled, between people's personal perspective on the issue, which is personal. Exactly. And there's obviously a strong spiritual element of it, which we respect. And then there's the policy implications of what this means. Even if you take out, obviously women's, which
right,
we're not, but, women's personal rights and their freedoms. But the reality is there's a very heavy healthcare, literally life or death. And, the scenarios where women, are put in harm's way with this decision are myriad. And we're going to need to have healthcare experts to really tease that out to really, for people to understand how this puts women's lives, and particularly Black Latina women with mortality rate issues in peril during the pregnancy process. But this is also a criminal justice issue, because now what's going to happen is that Black and Latina women, particularly in the South, are going to get put in jail.
Right.
And this idea that, and I've had these conversations, and I wish I'd had more of them with pastors and more conservative Latinos around this issue, would say, okay, when I respect your opinion on this issue, but my question to you is when one of the young Latinas, or not even somewhat young Latinas in your congregation gets incarcerated for this, are you going to go to the court to ask for mercy? Are you going to take in her children? Are you going to take her family to go visit her in prison? There's some real life implications here. Can you talk about the criminality now, besides the healthcare, the obvious healthcare peril that so many of our women are going to be put in now? Can you talk about how this further criminalizes and dehumanizes the Latina community?
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, that's been a huge point of discussion was, how are these laws actually going to be then, are you arrested? Like if you appear at a hospital because you unfortunately maybe tried to harm yourself, and then you're arrested because you tried to self-terminate a pregnancy. If it is discovered that you had access to the abortion pill and you take that and you safely, end your pregnancy, and somebody says something that, to an authority, are you arrested? We don't know. And it is incredibly, and one thing too that the right has tried to do very, in a very sophisticated manner, is to put the blame on other people around the woman, so that it's the physician, it's the healthcare provider, it's the person who drove you to the clinic, it's the, you name it. It's everybody around you who participated in your abortion. It's not you, so that they can look like they don't want to criminalize women. But when in the end, that's really the only thing you can do. Like if you're going to make abortion illegal and a woman has an abortion and she's the only one involved in that process, then how is that not going to, put her in like a really like view of law as having committed a crime and needing to be arrested? Right. And then what is the criminal pathway? Like, really, what does that look like? And then we've had a lot of conversations too around this going from state to state. I think I heard on average, it's 270 miles that a woman is going to have to travel on average. So that's not even in states where you look like, in Texas, where you live in Central Texas, either direction to get out of Texas is going to take you 8 hours.
That's right.
So like that, what does that mean for women that travel? If you're in Pennsylvania and let's say you have a governor that does not, that puts in place abortion restrictions and laws and bans, and you cross out, you go over to the city, what does that mean? And you come back. That to me, I think is the scariest part, because they also know what they're doing. Instill the fear of being arrested, of criminal prosecution, of, going to jail. And then when you think on top of that, the cost and the risks that women are taking. So you already have to figure out how to pay for yourself to get out of the state, to, pay for the procedure. Thank God, honestly, that there are abortion funds and amazing funds and providers that are really helping women, and all pregnant people figure out how to manage getting access. But it's you are undertaking a tremendous amount on yourself in traveling. And then they're seeding the question of what does that prosecution look like if you go to another state. And obviously, my state of Texas, first to say we're going to, it will be criminalized to leave the state to obtain abortion care, which is horrible.
Yvonne, I'm going to bring Enrique back in a minute to ask you a question, how this relates to sort of the 2022 elections, which we're going to be, knee deep in here already, right? But I wanted to ask you, because there are people watching this today, and again, we really appreciate everyone watching and listening to Found Translation with Yvonne Gutierrez, that maybe are now just kind of refocusing on this issue and or maybe shocked, dismayed, or the learning curve to understand it. But maybe already activists in our space. Maybe they're healthcare activists or housing activists, or people that are engaged on some level in electoral politics. Can you help us we're going to have lots of conversations all summer about this, but can you help us talk about the intersectionality of these issues and how it's so important for us to connect the dots to people around how this decision impacts healthcare, which impacts our economy, which impacts so many of these other issues that we're involved in. So can you just share about how we help people connect the dots between how all these issues are connected?
Yeah, 100%. One thing that we used to say at, Planned Parenthood, and I'm sure my former colleagues still feel this deeply today and know this, that, our patients live full lives. They are moms, they have jobs, they, might be documented or undocumented. They are living human beings who have, reproductive rights and agency, or they should. And this impacts really, as it impacts pregnant people in this way of, and I mentioned this earlier, how are you going to get the resources that you need in order to travel, in order to care for your children, in order to get the time off work? I don't know how many patients that I'd heard from, in the past say that they've had to quit jobs. I mean, imagine having to quit your job because you can't get the time off that you need to get the care that you need. Right. And I think we've seen a lot of employers come forward and say that they're going to support, women, who work for their companies and, pregnant people to be able to access the care that they need. But not everybody's going to have that access. And then also too, when you think about how, and I'm very fortunate in my job with Latino Victory, I get to work with amazing Latino and Latinx candidates. Rochelle Garza in Texas, who has actually represented a teen who was in detention who wanted access to abortion, and the federal government was not allowing her to, was restricting to. This was under the Trump administration, and Rochelle took the case to court and won. But is that everybody now? Like, honestly, like how are we thinking about just the sheer number of women who are going to need access to care and all of the challenges that they are going to face in their lives in order to receive that care? That has impacts across issue. When you think about our healthcare system, when you think about women who and pregnant people who have experienced a miscarriage. Well, how do you think you treat that? And so many of these restrictions don't think about that. So then our physicians, what are they going to be able to do in the hospital? Like, what is that going to mean for the risk that they're going to take? Are women now going to have to travel when they've had a miscarriage in order to have that, that treatment and that managed? And what is the impact that we know already is on, people's lives, whether they, to become parents or not? And then we've heard conversations about how is this going to infect in vitro for people who want to get pregnant. This is all over the place. I mean, you talk about hitting issues. I don't know a single issue that we don't touch here, that we are not impacted. And I think too, in looking at the Supreme Court and the decisions that have come out of the court lately, likely going to get a bad climate decision, an immigration decision today or tomorrow, right? Like, that's happening. And if we're not banding together, especially as we know, the court has other agendas in mind, and folks who say not to worry about gay marriage and contraception, well, they're the same people who said don't worry about Roe. So I think that it's really, really important that we think about this issue and the lives that it impacts, as opposed to it being a single issue.
Absolutely. I read briefly before I go into my question, and I can't remember what city it was in, but there was a woman, a mother, who came in, and she had an emergency with her pregnancy. And it was determined that in order to save the mom, an abortion had to be done. They waited hours because the doctor had to check with their lawyers at the hospital. Mom almost died. They ended up saving mom. Right. But again, it was, to your point, they go in, not necessarily they don't want an abortion. They were hoping to carry their child to term, right, and have a beautiful, healthy baby. But complications happen. As a father, and my wife, we had twins, and that was a tough pregnancy for her. She was on bed rest, for a few weeks there. We had to be very, very careful. Thank God everything turned out okay, right? But I remember having several visits with the doctor and say that these are all the complications that can happen, right? And you don't anticipate them, but you have to be prepared. So this was a perfect example of where this can happen. This is a real life situation, but yet hours were wasted because they did not know if they could perform this procedure and save mom, which thankfully they did. Before I get to my question about how this is going to impact the 2022 midterms, hot off the press, we're all about that here at the Found in Translation podcast. President Biden's in Madrid right now for NATO, but he was speaking at a press conference, and he just said that he would support an exception to the Senate's filibuster rules to make it easier to write abortion protections into law. Just want to get your quick reaction to that. And what do you think?
Well, I think that's huge progress. And, it's really unfortunate that we're living in a time where we, don't necessarily hold the Senate. Like, if Manchin is in there, right? Let's be real, and Sinema to a very high extent. And so if anything is going to be done now, it is going to have to take really action at the highest level. And the obviously the elections. But I think that the administration and the president have obviously been very clear of what they need from Congress in order to take action. But having that support is tremendous. Yeah.
So there's a lot we're getting ready for 2022. Lots of issues on the table, right? You've got the January 6th hearings, of course. There's been a stalemate.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Rafael and I are going to get back into that's like a telenovela. I joke about that all the time.
Totally a telenovela.
Yeah. So between January 6th, immigration stalemate, where are we with that? We've got a lot of issues around climate, to your point, right? There should be a ruling coming down today as to whether or not they're actually going to reverse some of the climate rules that are in place that's protecting us from going into, I don't know what, this planet blowing up. I'm being facetious,
Yeah.
but we're getting there. But do you think this is going to motivate people? People, again, if you listen to everybody saying, and if you follow history, right, the current president, whichever party is in the White House, they
Right.
lose in the midterms, right? Saw that with Obama in his first term. I mean, right after his first term, right, those midterm elections, right? We saw that with Bush as well, Clinton. So, but do you think this is going to motivate some people who probably were going to sit on the sideline this year and actually come out? People are saying the House is gone, but we can still hold on to the Senate. You were talking about the Senate, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got an opportunity to pick up a House. I mean, the Senate seat in Pennsylvania,
We
right?
do.
Hopefully we can protect Cortez Masto, right? And Mark Kelly and Nevada and Arizona. So anyway, I'll stop talking because I really would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think 100% motivation. And I said this when I was speaking on a panel recently about, if you weren't super excited about, like your governor's race or your attorney general's race, well, you sure as hell should be now, because they're going to be making decisions about your life immediately. And your rights and the rights of women and pregnant people all across, your state. And I think about that a lot with Texas because, I'm a Tejana, Ray hears me talk about Texas all the time. But, I think too that, it's like, people almost kind of with a foregone conclusion, like, well, there's nothing we can do. Like, but with this level of motivation and understanding what's at stake. And I think in a lot of states too, that you see Arizona, Wisconsin, where, like, okay, well, maybe there's a sexy race, here and there. And, maybe that'll motivate some people, but is there going
Ohio too, right?
Ohio as well.
Yeah.
Like, is there going to be real energy to get to the polls? And I think that we're going to see now, I mean, especially as, people always doubt young people about voting, that I think especially young people with the terrible tragedies that we've seen in our country around guns, the obviously, what we are likely going to see on climate, what has happened with Roe. I was watching, I don't know, CNN, this 15-year-old girl is standing outside the Supreme Court and she's like, I don't even, like, I had no idea I would ever be coming to the Supreme Court to talk about Roe v. Wade. She's 15. Like, this is where we are right now. And I think that we're going to have a lot of people really see and be able to connect the dots. But here's the thing. I think that Democrats are really going to have to, and self-included, like all of us who care about, democracy. I've said this like countless amount of times that this election is about saving democracy. Like, our talking points about this have got to be sharp. We have got to get it together around what we are delivering and what the consequences are of the other side. Because it's, and I don't know how many times, and I'm sure Ray, you've heard this too a lot, like pollsters, well, do this and don't do that. And like, you'll turn off people if you go, negative. And I'm like, okay, well, now that we know lives are absolutely at stake and that you woke up one day, like, and having less rights than you did the day before. I joked with my poor partner. I was like, you need to go get the coffee today because you have more rights than I do. Okay.
It's true though. That's the saddest thing. But Yvonne, on that point, and you actually made the point, and we literally, and it's unfortunately we're really in a state by state, hand to hand combat battle here electorally, and you brought up my home state of Pennsylvania. Literally, that governor's race will decide if millions of Pennsylvania women will have abortion rights or not. I mean, that's literally that. It's that stark. Doug Mastriano is so dangerous to our country,
yes,
on many levels. But and there's other states like that, Arizona and many others, that literally it's on the line in November. But the frankly, the part I'm more concerned about of the two P's you talked about was being able to talk coherently and passionately about what Democrats are planning on delivering or have delivered, because, let's be honest about it. This is just not, whether it's from Build Back Better battle, and sort of the slowest response to the inflation piece, crime and safety issues, which in our communities is a very important issue. We can't skirt that. We just haven't seen the level of aggression and boldness that I think we need to see here. And so, on some level, all we can do is continue to push the envelope and push the administration and push Democratic leadership to do more and be seen doing more. But I just wanted to get before Enrique asked you a question about what we could do moving forward to support Latinas and their reproductive health rights. Just any thoughts around this piece, because they've just got to give us more to offer, because the argument, and look, this happened in 2016 to some degree, certainly happened in 2020 to some degree. Like, you got to vote for us because the other side's really bad. It's just typically not going to be enough. So to at least get turnout out. So just any thoughts about what, if there's one thing Democrats should be doing, or just any advice to them around in the administration, like what can we do now, with understanding there's limitations, to really get this going, because we've got to show our community, particularly our Latinas, that we're fighting for them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I was, I don't know if it was a news piece I was listening to, but it was like, that's the 2018 question. Like, was this an anti-Trump vote, or was it a vote because, Democrats delivered on healthcare? And Obamacare was preserved and people were excited about that, right? So was it, where was the motivation? But I think, obviously, no doubt about it, the other side is terrible for us. We were going to continue to see lives moving backward. I can't even imagine what this country will look like if we have more governors who will essentially ban abortion in their states, and just the women that need to travel to some of these states is really scary. But also, this is the moment for Democrats to be bold. And I think that they want to. I really do. I believe in our people. I believe they deeply, deeply care. I believe they also, and I always say this about Democrats, like, we care about the truth. We care about all the facts. We care about, they do not. And they will just go and say the things that they believe will motivate, that they believe will agitate. And I think that we need to be bold in saying what we stand for and what we will do. Yes, it's been very difficult and painful for our communities, and what we haven't been able to see thus far from the administration due to the gridlock in Congress. But it's also, really thinking about this election and the critical nature of this election, and that we are your people, not just we're better than the other guy. Right. But literally, we are the people who are going to deliver for you and provide care and services and rights for you.
And I encourage people to look up Jamal Bowie, the New York Times writer, wrote an excellent article this week around looking historically that, the president in the White House has historically had tools, and there are precedents for the administration to rein in a rogue Supreme Court. So I encourage, and expanding the court. I mean, there's options here. Obviously, there needs to be some ethics rehauls when it comes to the Supreme Court with Clarence Thomas, and that's another conversation.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah. So there's this idea that they can't do anything. There's only so much they could do. We've got to push back on that, because the other side is off the rails when it comes to, sort of norms in our politics. So we have to do the right thing. Enrique has a question as we wrap this incredible conversation with Yvonne Gutierrez. Yvonne, I know people on the edge of their seat and are really in tune with what you're talking about, and we super appreciate your expertise and your care in these issues. Enrique has a question about what do we do next, and how do we support our Latinas moving forward in their healthcare rights?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I get there, one quick comment. Yes, to Rafael's point, we know that the other side is going to do everything they can to continue to decimate laws and rights that we've had. So, we Democrats need to step up. And the other thing that I would say on the messaging piece, and I agree with you 100%, Yvonne, but this whole notion of when they go low, we go high, it's okay to get in the mud once in a while. And I think that's what people are looking for from Democrats. Where's the fight? Right. And I think we've seen it in some places, right, with some of these members, especially when they're giving House floor speeches. But, they need to do that in their district, right? They need to do that more. Yeah. And I'm glad to see some folks are stepping up, but we need to get in the fight. They need to get scrappy more. And that, I think, is what we want to see.
Can I just be really honest about Enrique's statement?
Yeah.
And if you think about, I think about how AOC, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, articulates her vision and claps back on the other side. there's nothing nasty about it, really. She's just telling the truth and her truth and the way she looks at her vision of how to move forward and her leadership style, right? And I'm sorry, I really think there's such a denial from the elites and the president on down the Democratic Party about this pushback around, when women of color and young people stare their truth, all of a sudden we're being rude or we're being off the rails, when in fact that we have a Republican Party that's a white nationalist, anti-democratic, fascist entity. So to be polite to them, you're willing to lose your party. Like, I just think there's a level of classism and racism and gender issues tied up to that whole conversation, because all we're trying to do is save our democracy and have a center left government that's ethical. So that I really think we have to challenge a lot of these structures and paradigms, because it's there's nothing wrong with wanting the best for our country and simply telling the truth about the dangers of the other side. And this nice, keeping by the norms, thinking about Senator Sinema. What are you keeping the Senate, traditions up if we don't have a country?
Yeah.
And what are you really protecting here? And I think there's some real there's some real issues there. But Enrique, I know you had your final question for you.
Yeah, no. So it just goes to, Yvonne, what can people do who are interested in supporting these kinds of reproductive rights organizations? What can they do? What do you recommend?
Yeah, well, and I want to say something to the previous point that Ray made, because I think it's really important too that we do push. All right, I think that we've heard a lot from folks that are like working on the inside baseball of how to get things done in Congress right now, and how to appropriately push the White House and the administration and all of that. But it is do everything in your power. Like, the message is do everything in your power in order to make sure that women are not dying. like we've got to get super granular. And I think to the effect that, expanding the court filibuster, all of those things, like we've got to exhaust every option. And if they are truly not options, fine. We got to get our asses to the polls, right? Like that is like, even if we do get some kind of relief, from Congress, that it is so critically important. It is all up to the states now, which apparently the Supreme Court didn't think was such a good idea on New York and guns, right? Let's not leave it to the states in that point, in that point of view. But sorry, that wasn't your question.
Well, and the irony, right? Well, the states can do this, but they can't do that. And it's like, so which one is it, right? Again, that's another. We can go on and on about SCOTUS and the decisions that they've rendered here.
Yeah, exactly.
So I appreciate that. Yeah, but again, if people want to support organizations like a Planned Parenthood or other organizations that are in the fight around reproductive rights, what do you recommend and how should they go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, as I mentioned too, around the funds that are needed to support accessing abortion, especially right now, look up your local abortion fund, support them. Ensure that that you are contributing to women who need to have access, and you do that by a fund. Who is your local? And I say this a lot, even though it's just kind of like, oh my God, absolutely get everything to Texas and to Florida and to all of these states. But one thing that is clear as well, and we've seen a lot of this, especially I know from Texas, is the providers that have the intake of all of the women. So even if you live in a state that, like, oh, we're going to be okay, you should still support your local Planned Parenthood, the local, independent abortion provider, the local abortion fund, because they know what they're doing. They're getting those resources to where they are needed. Where was it that Chicago, massive line outside of health centers. I mean, when you think about there's just what providers in states are going to see now is tremendous. And you look at states like Alabama, where it was just lights out, immediately. And for, especially, and, Ray, you talked about Black maternal mortality earlier. This is, for Black women and Black pregnant people as well, of just, how tragic it is that we're going to see in these states that we know are already at the very, very bottom, as far as like economic security, as far as access to healthcare, as far as, quality public school education, as far as, like having rural, as far as to the degree that their states have been gerrymandered and they have, and their voting rights have been taken away. I mean, it's just, it's tremendous. And that's where I think too, we're going to be leaning a lot on states that do have access and that are providing care, and we're going to need their help and support.
Yvonne Gutierrez, thank you so much from Latino Victory Fund. And again, a great friend to the show. You're going to be back, Yvonne, as we get down to the elections. We're going to be working really closely together in several states. So more to come from Yvonne Gutierrez, the Latino Victory Fund. Give the team our best. When we come back from break, I actually have breaking news related to immigration. Enrique, you probably haven't even seen it. There's actually a pleasant surprise that we can announce from SCOTUS. But Yvonne Gutierrez, thank you so much for joining us. Continue to follow Yvonne on social media, and we'll come back after this brief break with me and Enrique wrapping up this episode of Found in Translation. Thank you so much.
Que hay algo que se llama refuerzo intermitente, porque hay personas que dicen, si no te trata bien, pues deja a esa persona y ya. Pero que las personas que son abusadoras no tratan mal siempre, te tratan bien, luego te tratan mal, luego vienen otra vez y te tratan bien. Es como castigo y recompensa, como regalo y luego te castigan. Y entonces ahí es cuando confunden a la víctima, que la víctima no entiende o piensa, bueno, esta persona va a volver a ser como era al principio. Pero es importante que se den cuenta que si, por ejemplo, si está en una relación psicopática con alguien que abusa psicológicamente y emocionalmente de ti, lo que conociste al principio de ellos fue un personaje. En verdad no son así. Esa persona no existe. Como te están tratando ahora, esa es la persona real. Y esa persona no va a cambiar, va a ir empeorando. Y es importante, no es que tienes que entender que no te puedes sentir responsable de enseñarle a esa persona cómo amar. No es tu responsabilidad enseñarle a una persona adulta cómo amar, pero sí es tu responsabilidad tú amarte.
Thank you so much. That's Dionelli Reyes, one of our frequent contributors, giving us her monologue on sort of self-love and self-empowerment in 2022. Enrique, briefly, we just got a bombshell, and we actually got some good news. Do you want to give people the good news here from SCOTUS? Breaking news from the Supreme Court. We actually had
we
interesting decision that just came down, brother.
Yeah, well, we just broke news with Yvonne as well on the SCOTUS decision. Well, with Biden's announcement in Madrid about what he would like to do, ending the filibuster to codify Roe. But Supreme Court just ruled that the Biden administration can cancel the Trump era Remain in Mexico policy, which is a huge win, big victory. But let's see what they do with it, right? Immigration talks have kind of stalled right now, right? There continues to be a group of senators that are trying to work on some immigration reform, but nothing has really come of it yet. Again, we're dealing with a lot right now, of course, right? Between inflation, they took up the gun issue, safety issue, right? Haven't done anything on voting rights either. But given that this decision came down, this is really, really great news. And big news for folks who have been victim to this, but organizations who have been working to get this overturned. So, Rafael, what do you think?
Well, first of all, Kavanaugh, who knew? This is really shocking, and we haven't had a chance to really analyze the thinking and how, get a sense of how such a right-wing conservative justice went with us on this one. But, and it's ironic that this is a policy that the Biden administration was in the process of rescinding, and got a lot of pushback from Democrats, particularly in the border states and in the West, because of a combination of them feeling like the timing wasn't good for them politically, but also they didn't feel like the administration had given them sort of a blueprint for how they were going to, sort of roll back this policy. So this is going to have a lot of impacts. It also, sort of in larger immigration news, we had this terrible tragedy in San Antonio that took place where, over a dozen people passed away. We have many people hospitalized that were stuck in a truck and living, traveling in inhumane conditions. Enrique, this really speaks to why we need to have a much broader, more comprehensive approach to immigration policy in our southern border.
Absolutely. This is just a tragic, tragic event. As you said, dozens have died, 53 total as of yesterday. Some in their teens. 11 people still hospitalized. Hopefully they will recover. The victims are mainly from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras. The issue now for officials is identifying these folks, right? Because they come across a lot of times they don't have the proper paperwork, or they even may have paperwork that is not in their name, right? So they're trying to figure out how they can, notify next of kin and families. But to your point, Rafael, this just underscores again that we have an outdated and broken immigration system. Your thoughts on the tragedy and where we go from here.
This is sort of a continuation of, and this is what we've been saying on the show for a long time. An immigration activist was saying it pretty much, since immigration reform in the 80s passed, and we've needed a revised policy. Is that this is when you conflate a human rights crisis with a political problem. And so, instead of approaching what's been happening with our southern border and immigration policy writ large on the southern border with the humanitarian crisis and humanitarian issue, and conflating it with Latinos, immigrants, or some sort of like either threatening us or attacking us, and you're dehumanizing, these folks, that, almost all of them are just coming for a better life. And by the way, the adults, all of them, we need for our labor, so
It's also an economic issue, right?
There's
exactly.
an economic carrot. There's big economic carrots drawing them here. They're not here not to work, right? And by the way, we need their labor. So we're very hypocritical from an economic perspective, but as we've for decades, the political messaging and the rhetoric and the right-wing media has dehumanized this community, this part of our community, to the point where this is allowed to happen.
Absolutely.
And so we need to really bring back, and that's why we push back on anti-immigration rhetoric, on xenophobia in all forms, because this is what happens when you dehumanize people. These are the kind of things that end up happening. And so, and look, let's keep it real. The Mexican government and Mexican leadership has a role to play in this as well. And so we need to hold ourselves binationally hold ourselves accountable. But obviously we care for those families, and we'll continue to support the organizations in Texas that are supporting immigrant families during this very difficult time. It's such a tragic incident. It's so sad.
Yeah. And when the Mexican president had an opportunity to address this, right, at the Conference of the Americas in Los Angeles, he refused. He refused because, Biden did not invite representatives from Cuba. And I believe it was
and Venezuela.
Venezuela. That's right, Venezuela. So,
too. I forget
so again, in his grandstanding, he missed an opportunity to have a real conversation, substantive conversation around this. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. All these Central American as well as Mexico governments have a role to play in this, right? We need to look for opportunities to work together, because unfortunately, this will probably continue to happen. Hopefully, it will not. But we also know the criminal element here too, right? That they prey on these poor people who desperately want to come for work and for a better life, and this is the result of that. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah. And so, turning to the latest on January 6th, Cassidy Hutchinson, who's going to play her in the movie, Enrique? Because this young lady has come out of nowhere and had the bravery. Talk about someone who's literally putting their life on the line, to have the bravery to really pin and really provide us some salient, substantive evidence that President Trump, I was shocked, because I really think the bottom line is President Trump, de corazon, is a big punk and always hides behind bluster and has never gotten in a bar fight in his life. And it's, he's a bully that has no, the emperor has no clothes, right? But I was shocked that he actually wanted to go to the Capitol. I just thought he was talking smack. But Enrique, when you heard that President Trump actually wanted to be like, on some level, front and center, knowing that this mob was armed, this arm was violent, they had bad intentions, wanted to actually be part of the attack on our nation's capital. I mean, I knew this man was the lowest of the low, but to actually have evidence that he was wanted to actually supposedly fought a Secret Serviceman to try to turn the car toward the Capitol. I mean, I'm at loss of words, Enrique. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, who knew he had it in him, right? I agree. I thought he was just selling wolf tickets, as we say back home. He was selling wolf tickets. He wasn't going to go to the Capitol. It was all an affront. And then I'm imagining when she's saying this, what it would have looked like. He goes down, Constitution Avenue over to Independence. Is he out in front with the mob? Does he go up and speak? All right, there was part of the conversation that she talked about with Meadows.
Would he enter the Capitol? It's
that was
unbelievable.
That was one of the things they talked about, right? That he was possibly one of the scenarios had him actually speaking at the Capitol and then actually walking in to the House chamber to demand a recount. I mean, what would that have looked like, right? I mean, and just think of the security concerns. Does Secret Service escort him in? What happens when you got Capitol Police? Is there a standoff in there? Because the president cannot go to Congress unless he is invited by the Speaker of the House. He was not invited. So then would he have been considered an enemy combatant at that point? I mean, it just raises a lot of different really crazy questions that I don't think anybody has ever thought about.
Enrique, we knew that our democracy was, post that election, that 2 or 3 months was going to be, touch and go. We knew that. Mm-hmm. But once Barr seemed to kind of dismiss it, and it just, and the results were starting to get codified by the states, I think by New Year's we figured, the worst of it, the threat was over. But the most shocking thing about this is how close we were to losing our democracy. I mean, literally, if it wasn't for these 10 to 20 characters that, just wouldn't go there with him. And it's unbelievable. And I got to go back to it, the reports of weapons in the crowd. I just go back to it, man. You talk about white privilege. Can you imagine you have a mob? Could you imagine if there was a mob of people of color like that with weapons? I mean, that would have ended real fast. There would have been a lot of shots fired in the crowd, and then it would have been over real quick. Sure. So it's just there's just so much. It's just so shocking. And Merrick Garland, my man. I mean, what else you got to see, Pop? And I understand. Look, I don't anticipate any charges till after November because he needs time. And, there is that precedent around not trying to charge people, too close to an election. So I would say this, fam, don't anticipate any charges till after November. I think that's okay because you need to put all this together.
Yeah.
We've only seen 12 hours of testimony of the over 1,000 hours of testimony that the committee has. So the DOJ's got to go through a lot of stuff. But wow, I mean, Garland's got to do this because the alternative is much worse. It's much, much worse. Enrique, as we wrap this up, brother, you got a shout out for me? I got a couple.
Yeah. I will start out with my shout out for today is shouting out to Unidos US. They're having the annual conference in all places, San Antonio. That's right. There's going to be a lot of just heavy hearts for folks who are attending the conference this year. And I'm shouting it out because it's the first one that's taking place in person, right? Given COVID and what's happened the past few years. So I will be there. I'm looking forward to being there. They've got some great speakers. I understand that the First Lady, Joe Biden, will be there. And
Joe will be in the house. That's
along
right.
with a few other elected officials, of course. The Castro brothers were going to be in their backyard. So I think it's going to be a great event and a great opportunity for the community to get together to talk about issues that are not only going to be front and center for the midterms, but moving forward. So shouting out to Unidos US for putting together the conference again and having it in person in San Antonio.
I'll have a lot of FOMO. Definitely if you're in San Antonio, certainly, but if you're in Texas, our Houston friends, you're not too far away. Other people in the Valley or Austin or even other parts of the state or the country. July 9th to the 11th in San Antonio, the Unidos Conference is always a wonderful convening of Latino leaders around the country, especially our direct service providers who are doing the great work day to day for signing up our people for housing programs, food insecurity, immigration services, healthcare services, our schools or after school programs. I mean, our friends in the direct service provider space just do God's work. And and it's always a great time. And shout out to our colleagues at Unidos US. We're going to have a great conference. Unfortunately, I won't be there, but I'll be there in spirit with you, brother. So enjoy a couple nice evenings on the Riverwalk with me. I want to shout out, we had elections on Tuesday, and there was some interesting results, including 3 Latino candidates for the Lieutenant Governor's race in New York. Antonio Delgado, the former congressman, won his primary race the other day. But I want to shout out Dalia Ramirez. Dalia Ramirez is a member of the Illinois legislature that just won her primary. And she almost certainly will be the latest CHC member, the second Latino congressional member for the state of Illinois, Illinois 3. That was a second Latino majority district drawn during the redistricting process last year. Dalia Ramirez, Guatemalan American, Enrique, so adding to the diversity of the CHC and reflecting the diversity of our great Latino community. So it's not all bad news, Enrique. We got strong Latinas out here doing great things, and want to make sure we shouted out Dalia Ramirez, who we'd love to have on the show as part of who's going to be almost certainly a new member of Congress in January.
Well, I think you mentioned this earlier in a previous conversation, but when we have Democrats in office, things happen at the state level, right? Given that they redrew the lines, a Latina was able to win in this district, knowing the constituency there. So again,
it's a good point.
All politics are local, and Yvonne, I think, hit that point as well earlier today about what's going on in the midterms and why it's so important to cast your vote also, and to take not only for federal offices, but looking at what's going on in each of these states. If you want change, you got to go vote. But I think this is a perfect example of that.
We got to have, maybe it'll be right after the elections, because we got to focus on the swing states next few months. But we do need to have like a Chicago takeover of the show. We got so many friends out there. State Senator Cristina Pacion is a great friend, former Unidos senior leader of one of our affiliate networks. Michael D. Rodriguez, one of my homeboys, who's an alderman, part of Chuy Garcia's network, of course, Chuy. And we have so many great leaders and friends. Dr. Juan Andrade, my godfather, and in the national political world. So we got a lot of good things happening in the Chi. Last shout out, Enrique, our homie that I mentioned to you, your homie, Isaac Paredes, who had 3 home runs the other day. He has 10 home runs, and he's only played in the majors like a month. This Mexicano this guy.
He's tearing it up.
He is tearing it up, this guy.
We've
had a nice collection of Mexican players. Yeah. I always got to support my Ricans and stuff, but Alejandro Kirk, the catcher for the Blue Jays, powerful hitter. That's Luis Gonzalez guy for Hermosillo from the Giants, real good-looking guy, real fluid player. So the Mexicano baseball guys are having a nice season, brother. So I know you're supporting your Atzalan baller. We appreciate Yvonne Gutierrez, just a wonderful leader. We had a great conversation with her, and we encourage people to continue to support our Latina leaders, particularly in the reproductive rights space and the healthcare access space. And we're going to bring these kind of leaders. This is the only place we really have, one of the very few places, I should say, where we really have this free-flowing opportunity to introduce you to some of the leaders that are really doing the real work. And Found in Translation, Enrique, is truly the home for Latino politics.
Absolutely. And it was another great episode, Rafael. I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, echo what you said about Yvonne. We're going to continue to have folks like this on the show moving forward, continue to have not only current electeds, former electeds, but also people who understand what's going on, not only in their communities, but have great insights into what's going on writ large with national politics and how it impacts the Latino community. So again, another great episode, Rafael. Thanks so much.
No question about it. Happy July 4th, everybody.